We have breaking news to go over today as a massive Jays trade update has just dropped following a huge report revealing that a blockbuster trade is incoming. We're going to break down this exact report and discuss what this means going forward as Ross Atkins prepares for something big. We also have a few other updates ahead of the off day tomorrow, but also some more trade speculation outside of this brand new report that dropped as well. There is a ton to go over today, folks. But before we get into it all, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Jays content. Your guys' support has truly been unbelievable. And unfortunately, the Jays win streak was snapped today. But we have, minutes ago, a big report that has dropped surrounding a Toronto Blue Jays trade, and it is specifically surrounding two key players, including one that we have discussed before. Now, folks, about 15 minutes ago, as of the time of recording, Hector Gomez has come out and said, source, the Blue Jays have interest in both Edward Cabrera and Jacob DeGrom if he becomes available. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Hector Gomez, he's a fairly reliable reporter, has been hit or miss, though. I'll take it with a grain of salt, as I always say. But again, he got the Vladdy. I believe he was the first one in the Vladdy extension, like way before it happened. But he's a fairly reliable reporter, especially for, certain players. Now, this is very big information because we also have some reports from Ben Nicholson Smith to dive into and a ton of different things here. However, you can see this here. They have interest in both Edward Cabrera and Jacob DeGrom, two of the highest available players on the market. And this is extremely interesting because we're going to dive into both of them. But we know that even as recent as yesterday, Ben Nicholson Smith came out and spoke about a potential trade for Jacob DeGrom. I think if you're going to try to engage Texas, it's got to be a meaningful return. If you go to the playoffs with DeGrom healthy, that's the kind of weapon that can scare you in a series. So this is now multiple reports. And of course, I covered it in a video a couple of days ago surrounding Jacob DeGrom now. It seems that Jacob DeGrom is not only on their radar, but they are, according to multiple reports here, willing to go for them and have interest in acquiring one of the two if they become available. Now, we assume Edward Cabrera is going to be available depending on how the Marlins be, but Jacob DeGrom, that is big now. There's starting to become actual smoke here, which kind of feels like a pipe dream. We'll dive into what it takes, but let's dive into, of course, some interesting stats first. So this is, of course, Edward Cabrera, and let's start with him. You can see here, this season in 15 games. Now, Miami has been playing a little bit better as of late, which makes things a little bit more interesting for the Toronto Blue Jays regarding if they're actually going to want to pursue him. However, you look at his stats, a very solid year thus far. 3.33 ERA, 15 games, and he would presumably be, would he be cheaper than Jacob DeGrom? Of course, you would assume, but that might not even be the case with how much supposedly the players and starting pitchers are going to go for. And we know how highly touted starting pitching is. And you can see this here. This is from a Bleacher Report article from a Bob Nightingale report, basically saying and outlining how starting pitching is always available at the deadline. Of course, we've talked about Merrill Kelly, Zach Gallen, all these different guys here, on the channel. But when you're looking at the higher echelon of players, you can see in the middle paragraph, Edward Cabrera, Sandy Alcantara, it becomes very interesting. Now, you pair that with a little Jacob DeGrom action where he is now a 2.29 ERA in 18 games. You have the smoke from Ben Nicholson Smith coming out. It has gotten very real very quickly, which is quite interesting because, of course, we're now a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks away from the trade deadline. And, of course, moves can happen before the trade deadline, but you're going to start hearing reports like this. And again, I'm taking this report itself with a grain of salt, but the fact that this is paired with what we've heard from Ben Nicholson Smith, and he doesn't seem to talk about, big players like this very lightly. Now, again, it would be a huge return. I'm expecting Trey Savage to go if they acquire Jacob DeGrom, and I did a video this other day. Let me know in the comment section, would you want, a trade, or would you rather want to trade Trey Savage or Arjun Namala for Jacob DeGrom? That's, of course, one of the big question marks going forward here is if you would want to trade one of those two. And again, we're at the point now where you're in a very intriguing spot with this specific roster, with this specific team, because you look at the starting rotation, you have Gausman, you have Berríos, you have Bassett. And then, of course, after that, it becomes a little bit more, not necessarily, weak, but up in the air for sure. And you pair that with the fact that, again, there's reports that the Jays are going to go all in. There's reports now that they're interested in guys like Edward Cabrera and Jacob DeGrom. It has gotten very real surrounding both of these guys. And of course, for Edward Cabrera, you are in, very interesting territory here now. If you're able to acquire him, he's a very reliable starter. Is he a starter that will be an ace on the staff? He'd probably be the ace for this Toronto Blue Jays staff, but I'm not going to go as far as to say that he has the upside that a guy like Jacob DeGrom has, even though he's 10 years older, Jacob DeGrom, that is, compared to Edward Cabrera. And that's where things become very tricky because, of course, the haul for both of these guys is going to be a ton, right? Whether that be DeGrom, whether that be Edward Cabrera, it's going to be a massive haul. You have guys, and it's clear here. There's going to be a meaningful return, and the Jays, and you look at their previous deadlines here, and this is a very interesting thing to note because you look at the previous deadlines. They haven't lost a lot of their deadline deals that they have made. And let's look back now. Of course, last trade deadline, they sold, right? So we're not going to be counting that. But let's look at the deadline this year when they were looking to acquire talent. Most recently, when they were trying to acquire talent in a buy year was 2023. You look at it there, Henderson Cabrera, Jordan Hicks, Paul DeYoung. You basically gave up nothing, right? Like the biggest, I remember at the time, the biggest headliner of that was the Jordan Hicks deal. You gave up Sam Roberts and Adam Kloffenstein, none of which are really coming back to haunt the Jays. The year before, Nick Frasso, that was the big one that you gave up in the Mitch White deal. That's probably still the one that's maybe stings the most, but again, he's not doing anything either right now for the Dodgers. Jordan Groshans flared out. Remember Max Castillo and Samad Taylor, both of those guys, nothing prospect, and they had some really good players back at that time. Anthony Bass, with all the controversy and all the things, he was a fine reliever. Whit Merrifield, a very valuable player. Even back in 2021, like Ross Atkins has a history of making really solid deals at the deadline, and that's why I trust him. But it also, like for people who don't think that Ross Atkins makes big moves at the deadline, have a look right here. Like you can look right here, and he has made a lot of moves, 3 to 4 trades per deadline. 2020, he made 7 trades. They went pretty deep in. You think back to 2016, of course, almost a decade ago, when that was the year after the Tulo trade. They went in again. Did they get, the required players? Meh, they didn't really get a whole lot. However, they made moves, 7 trades, 4 trades, 5 trades, 3 trades, 3 trades. We can expect multiple big moves to come, and they're expected to be ultra aggressive at the deadline, as we all know here. And I think it's becoming a very interesting thing because let me know out of the two, who would you prefer between Jacob DeGrom and, of course, Edward Cabrera? I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of starting pitchers available. Luis Severino, Merrill Kelly, Zach Gallen, Jacob DeGrom, Sandy Alcantara, Edward Cabrera, all these different guys. And I think the Jays will probably end up, if I had to guess, with Edward Cabrera out of these two. But the new reports that are dropping now, 15 minutes ago, of course, keeping you up to date, it makes you think, and I think if they're going for a guy like Jacob DeGrom, Arjun Amala might have to be the headliner there. So let me know down below, would you get rid of Arjun Amala or Jacob DeGrom for a guy like Arjun Amala or Trey Savage for a guy like Jacob DeGrom? What package would you do for Edward Cabrera? Because at the end of the day, folks, we're inching closer and closer to the All-Star break. We have one more series, of course, an off day tomorrow into the series against the Athletics. And after the All-Star break, you're right into it against extremely good teams. You have the Giants, Yankees, Tigers back to back to back. So an absolute beast of a of a division, of course, that we're in here now. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. But let me know down below what your thoughts are. Brand new report just dropped. Had to keep you up to date with all the latest. It seems Ross Atkins is going all in and a blockbuster trade is coming. Thank you guys for watching. You guys are beasts. Cheers.